The banging on my front door was loud enough to rattle the window. I opened it, and there she stood. Sandra, HOA Vice President, tan blazer, clipboard in hand, lips pursed like she'd bitten a lemon. "I'm here about that ramp," she said, pointing to the brand-new wheelchair ramp leading from my porch to the driveway. It wasn't a surprise. Ever since I installed it for my dad, who'd just come home from a stroke, Sandra had been circling my property like a vulture with an HOA handbook. We caught her walking by 3 times a day, pretending to walk her little yappy dog, but always stopping just long enough to stare and scribble notes on that clipboard, like she was building a case for the Supreme Court. "You didn't submit the proper forms. It's an architectural violation," she snapped, waving her clipboard as if that settled everything. I tried to stay calm. "It's for my father. He can't walk. It's temporary, just so he can get to his doctor appointments. He literally can't get out of the house without it." She didn't blink. The HOA guidelines are very clear. Any structural additions, including ramps, must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. "But it's a medical necessity," I said. "That's not my problem," she replied. "Remove it in 7 days, or you'll be fined $100 a day." I stood there, stunned. She turned on her heel and walked off, her little dog yapping behind her like it agreed with her nonsense. I watched her go, hands clenched, heart pounding with frustration. I slammed the door and called my lawyer. My dad had served 2 tours overseas. He was a firefighter for 30 years. And now, because life had hit him with a stroke, some neighborhood dictator in a tan blazer thought she could decide whether he was allowed to leave the house. The ramp wasn't even ugly. We'd hired a professional to install it. It matched the house's trim, was built with non-slip material, and wasn't visible from the street unless you were looking for it. But that's exactly what Sandra did. She looked for problems. The next day, we got the official violation notice. It was folded neatly in an envelope taped to our door. Sandra's name was on the signature line. My mom was furious. My dad just shook his head and said, "Let's see if she tells the same thing to my wheelchair." Our lawyer got involved right away. He helped us file a complaint with the State Housing Board and the city's Disability Rights Office. Turns out, the Americans with Disabilities Act has a lot to say about access and discrimination, especially when someone's ability to enter or exit their home is being threatened by an HOA. Meanwhile, Sandra wasn't done. She started walking by more frequently, now taking pictures from the sidewalk. One afternoon, we caught her measuring the ramp with a tape measure. My mom opened the door and shouted, "Get off our property!" But Sandra just said, "Public sidewalk. I can observe violations whenever I please." She wasn't just annoying anymore. She was a problem. Then one rainy afternoon, karma struck. I pulled into the driveway and noticed a crowd across the street. People were looking toward our house. There was an ambulance parked right in front, lights flashing. My heart skipped a beat. I thought something had happened to Dad. I jumped out of the car and ran toward the porch, and that's when I saw her. Sandra, on the ground, holding her ankle, mascara running down her cheeks, wailing in dramatic agony like she was auditioning for a soap opera. A paramedic knelt beside her, asking her questions. "What happened?" I asked one of the neighbors standing nearby. "She slipped," they said, "on your driveway." I looked over. Sure enough, the concrete was slick from the rain. There was a clear "No Trespassing" sign nailed to the side of the porch, but it didn't stop her. Apparently, she'd walked onto our property to tape another warning letter to the front door, ignored the sign, ignored the wet surface, and wiped out right at the edge of the ramp. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail. Sandra was suing us for negligence, claiming permanent injury, emotional distress, and unsafe property conditions. I laughed out loud when I read it. She was trying to sue the same people she was harassing for a fall that happened during one of her own unauthorized ramp raids. But here's the thing. Our house is rigged with security cameras. Every angle. The entire incident, from the moment she stepped onto the driveway to her slip and fall, was caught in crisp 1080p HD. In court, we didn't even need a fancy lawyer speech. We just played the footage. There she was, umbrella tucked under her arm, holding a plastic sleeve with another HOA letter, walking confidently past the no trespassing sign, slipping in her own high heels, landing with the grace of a dropped grocery bag. The judge watched the whole thing silently, then leaned back and said, "Ms. Walker, can you explain why you were on their private property in the first place?" Sandra stuttered. "I was delivering an official HOA notice. On foot? In the rain? Without permission?" the judge asked. She tried to shift blame. "They've been violating policies for weeks." Our lawyer stood and calmly pointed out that Sandra had no legal authority to enter private property. Then he handed the judge a report showing Sandra's history for previous personal injury lawsuits, all dismissed. One involved a shopping cart. Another claimed emotional damage after slipping on a floor mat in a public library. The judge sighed. "Ms. Walker," he said, "you are not the victim here. You are, however, lucky they aren't countersuing for harassment." Case dismissed. Sandra stood up, carefully this time, and hobbled out of court without another word. After that, everything changed. People in the neighborhood started coming up to us quietly, thanking us, telling us they were glad someone finally stood up to her. Turns out, Sandra had been terrorizing families for years. She once fined someone for planting flowers, too brightly colored. Another neighbor told us she threatened to report them for having a political sign in their window during election season. It was like a dam broke. People spoke out. Petitions circulated. And at the next HOA meeting, something amazing happened. Sandra was voted out. Gone. Just like that. And replacing her? My dad. Yep. The man in the wheelchair she tried to push back inside now runs the HOA board. And his first official act? A rule change allowing accessibility modifications, like ramps, handrails, or widened doorways, without prior approval. It passed unanimously. We kept the ramp. We planted flowers around it. We even added solar lights along the edge. Now every kid on the street calls it Grandpa's launch pad. Sandra, she moved out 2 months later. The house sold fast. She left quietly, no goodbye. No more clipboard. And every now and then, when it rains and the driveway gets a little slick, we joke about putting up a plaque that says, "Dedicated to Sandra. She fell so we could rise." My dad, a retired firefighter and veteran, had given everything to this country. He'd spent over 30 years rushing into burning buildings, helping people on their worst days, and standing tall in the face of danger. And now, all he needed was a little help getting from the front porch to the sidewalk. Wheels instead of boots. A ramp instead of stairs. But apparently, that was too much for Sandra, our HOA vice president. To her, a simple wooden ramp that allowed my father to go to his physical therapy appointments was an eyesore. Not a symbol of dignity. Not a gesture of respect for someone who'd served and sacrificed. Just an architectural violation. We tried to keep things respectful. I wanted to avoid drama. We were new to the neighborhood, and the last thing I wanted was a fight. I thought maybe if I explained things calmly, she'd understand. I even offered to submit pictures, paint the ramp the same color as the house, add flower planters on the side. Anything to make it blend in better with the aesthetics she cared so much about. I just want my dad to be able to leave the house safely. I told her one afternoon when she passed by. Sandra folded her arms and sniffed like I just offered to paint graffiti on the roof. "Rules are rules," she said. "Uniformity matters." Still, we made every effort to keep it clean and beautiful. We hired a licensed contractor. The ramp had clean rails, non-slip material, and the wood was stained to match our porch. It was done tastefully. If anything, it improved the look of our home. But Sandra didn't care. She sent letters. At first, they were worded like friendly reminders. Then they escalated into formal warnings. The HOA citations started arriving weekly. Fines were threatened. She claimed we hadn't filed appropriate architectural review paperwork, even though emergency accessibility installations are federally protected. At first, I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. But then Sandra started walking past our house 3 or 4 times a day. Each time, she stopped and stared. Not just glanced, stared. Clipboard in hand, writing something down every time she passed. Then she escalated again. One Tuesday afternoon, I looked out the window and saw her on my property. Not the sidewalk, not the edge of the lawn, She was on my front steps, leaning over with a tape measure, stretching it across the ramp. Click. Extend. Scribble. She didn't ask permission, didn't ring the bell. She just trespassed, measured, and took pictures with her phone. That was it. The moment I saw her crouched near the porch, snapping angles like she was gathering evidence for an FBI sting operation, something in me snapped too. I took a deep breath, walked outside, and said, "Sandra, you are not allowed on my property." She didn't even flinch. "I'm documenting a violation for the board." She said like she had the right to break the law just because she had a title on a letterhead. "You've crossed the line," I said. "This isn't your property, and that ramp isn't a violation. It's a medical necessity." She stood up slowly and said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Then I guess we'll see what the board says." Well, we saw all right. That evening, I contacted a local attorney who specialized in housing rights. I sent him pictures of the ramp, copies of the letters, screenshots of the citations, and yes, we had security footage of Sandra measuring our ramp without permission. He responded within hours. "This is a clear case of discrimination. File a complaint under the Americans with Disabilities Act immediately." And we did. We submitted everything to the city's housing authority and the ADA office. Every letter, every photo, the video footage. The formal complaint included a detailed summary of my dad's medical condition and the urgent need for accessibility. We even included statements from his doctor. It took about 2 weeks, but we got a response. They sided with us. In big, bold letters at the top of the notice, accessibility modification is protected under federal law. No homeowner association has the right to deny reasonable accommodations for medical necessity. That ramp, it was staying. What's more, the housing authority issued a formal warning to the HOA. They were told in no uncertain terms that any further attempts to interfere with a medical necessity could lead to legal consequences, fines, lawsuits, even dissolution of the HOA charter in serious cases. I read the letter out loud to my dad on the porch, and when I looked up, I swear I saw a smile in his eyes I hadn't seen since before the stroke. But Sandra? Oh, Sandra was furious. She tried to save face by calling an emergency HOA meeting. She wanted to vote on a new amendment to ban unsightly exterior structures, which was obviously code for wheelchair ramps. But she had no support. The board members, once silent or intimidated, suddenly weren't so sure they wanted to be on the wrong side of a federal housing violation. Word had started to spread. A few neighbors came up to me, quietly, and said, "Good for you. She's done this before." One guy told me she fined him for having his recycling bin on the curb 15 minutes early. Another said she wrote him up for having non-regulation curtains. Turns out, Sandra had been on a years-long power trip. My dad's ramp just happened to be the hill she chose to fight on, and now it was collapsing under her. She stopped walking past our house. No more clipboard, no more tape measure, just silence. But we weren't finished yet. With legal protection now clearly in our favor, we printed a laminated copy of the Housing Authority's response and posted it inside a little clear sleeve on one of the ramp's handrails, just in case Sandra, or anyone else, got another bright idea. One day, as my dad was rolling down the ramp to go to his therapy session, a little girl from 2 houses over came up with her mom and said, "Wow, that's so cool. I wish I had a ramp like that." Her mom whispered a quiet thank you and gave us a knowing smile. She had been fined the year before for having too many potted plants on her porch. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about us. This was bigger. Sandra had spent years policing the neighborhood like a tyrant, and no one had challenged her until now. We didn't just defend a ramp. We defended dignity, accessibility, family, and that's what made Sandra truly furious. Not just that she lost, but that her reign of control was starting to crack. The ramp didn't just give my dad his freedom. It gave the neighborhood a spine, and we weren't afraid anymore. It was a stormy Tuesday afternoon when it happened. I'd just gotten off a long shift at work, soaked from head to toe. Coffee barely warm in the cup holder. The sky was the color of wet cement, and thunder was rumbling like an angry warning overhead. I turned the corner into our neighborhood, expecting the usual quiet street, and the warm smell of my mom's cooking from the kitchen window. Instead, I was greeted by flashing red and blue lights in my driveway. I slammed the brakes. There was an ambulance parked diagonally across the street, one paramedic kneeling down near the edge of my front steps. A small crowd had gathered. Neighbors stood under umbrellas and porches, peeking out, murmuring to each other like they were watching an episode of reality TV unfold live. And right in the middle of it all was Sandra, flat on her back, holding her ankle, hair soaked, makeup running, screaming bloody murder as if she'd been hit by a bus. "I'm going to sue you," she shrieked, pointing toward my porch with the fury of a cartoon villain. "This is your fault. This is all your fault." I got out of my car and walked quickly toward the scene. "What happened?" I asked the nearest neighbor. "She fell," someone whispered. "On your driveway." Said she was trying to deliver another HOA notice. My jaw clenched. I looked around and spotted the familiar manila envelope, soggy, crumpled, and half stuck to the wet pavement near the ramp. And that's when I saw the biggest irony of all. She had slipped not on the ramp itself, but next to it, on the smooth concrete slope that led from the sidewalk to our front steps. Her ridiculous kitten heels, yes, she wore heels in the rain, were completely soaked, one of them still sitting a few feet away like it had been flung during the fall. Apparently, Sandra had come over with yet another official warning about the ramp, despite a very visible no trespassing sign bolted right above the mailbox. She ignored it, marched up our private driveway without permission, and then karma intervened. She lost her footing. The security camera footage shows it all. Her stepping over a puddle, fumbling with the letter in one hand, holding her phone in the other, and then wham! Her legs fly out like a cartoon slip. Her clipboard sails through the air, and she lands with a dramatic thud that even the camera's mic picks up. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so absurd. Paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, and despite clearly being embarrassed, she kept muttering about lawyers and lawsuits. One of the neighbors later told me they overheard her say, "I'm going to own this house when I'm done with them." 2 days later, it began. A letter arrived, certified mail. Sandra was suing us. She listed multiple claims: negligence, failure to maintain safe property conditions, emotional distress, and my personal favorite, ongoing hostility and harassment related to HOA activities. She claimed the ramp area was slippery and dangerous, that she was there on official HOA business, and that my lack of accommodation for wet conditions caused her severe physical and emotional trauma. I almost choked on my coffee reading it. We immediately called our lawyer, the same one who'd helped us with the ADA complaint. He read the suit twice, laughed, and said, "I hope she's prepared to be embarrassed. You have the footage, right?" Oh, we had the footage. Crystal clear, date-stamped, and multiple angles, thanks to my security system setup that covered the entire driveway and porch. You could see the no trespassing sign right above her head as she stepped onto the property. You could see the puddle, the shoes, the fall, the envelope flying through the air. Even better, the video captured what happened after she fell. Sandra, thinking no one was watching, dragged herself toward her phone, picked it up, and calmly sat there for 10 seconds before suddenly clutching her ankle and screaming. She wasn't hurt. She was acting. She literally checked the camera, then turned up the drama like she was auditioning for a soap opera. We brought all this to court. And let me tell you, when the judge watched that footage, the room went silent. Sandra's lawyer tried to spin it. My client was there performing HOA duties, which grants her limited immunity. The judge raised a hand and cut him off. Is that her stepping over a clearly posted no trespassing sign? Yes, Your Honor, but is that her slipping on a non-ramp area of the driveway, due to weather, in what appear to be heels? Yes, Your Honor. And is that her, after falling, checking her surroundings before suddenly acting hurt? There was no argument. The judge leaned back, visibly unimpressed. I see no legal standing here. Ms. Walker entered the property without permission, ignored clear signage, and proceeded to blame the homeowner for an accident of her own making. Case dismissed. Sandra turned red. Her jaw twitched, and she whispered something to her lawyer. He just shook his head. The judge wasn't done. You're lucky they're not countersuing for harassment. I suggest you avoid their property from now on." That was the end of the lawsuit, but not the end of the story. Word traveled fast. Someone leaked the courtroom footage online. It was public record. A neighbor uploaded the clip of Sandra pretending to be injured, side by side with her walking away afterward, completely fine. It blew up in our local Facebook group. People made memes. Someone edited in dramatic violin music and called it the fall of HOA Karen. The likes, thousands. The support, overwhelming. People began sharing their own Sandra stories. One guy said she fined him for not trimming a hedge. A woman down the street said she once got a citation for hanging a flag that clashed with the seasonal color scheme. Sandra had been tormenting people for years, but now, she was a joke. The HOA board, tired of the attention and the embarrassment, held a private vote. Within a week, Sandra was stripped of her position. No more authority. No more clipboard. No more fake citations. And me, I threw a small get-together that weekend. Nothing crazy. Just family, a few friends, and my dad, sitting proudly at the top of his perfectly legal wheelchair ramp, holding a plate of ribs and a big, satisfied smile. At one point, a neighbor raised a glass and said, "To Sandra, may her next fall be in a reality show." We all laughed. Sandra, we haven't seen her since. Some say she's still in the neighborhood, hiding behind curtains. Others say she put her house up for sale. I don't know. I don't really care. Because now, my dad rolls out onto that ramp every morning, nods at the neighbors walking by, and says, "Watch your step. Justice is slippery." And yes, I had a small brass sign made. It reads, "Caution, slippery when karma is wet." We mounted it right at the edge of the driveway, where Sandra fell, and where we stood tall. We showed up to court ready, fully locked and loaded with facts. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of the letters, the fake citations, the passive-aggressive threats, and the way Sandra made it her full-time job to make our lives harder, all over a ramp that let my dad leave the house in a wheelchair. What she saw as an ugly structure, we saw as freedom. So when we walked through those courthouse doors, it wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for my dad, for our rights, and honestly, for the whole neighborhood. My lawyer, Sarah Mendoza, was a quiet storm, calm, sharp, and always 10 steps ahead. She wore a navy blazer and carried a slim laptop case like it was a sword. We'd gone over everything the night before. The video clips, the property map, the legal precedents, and the one card Sandra didn't know we had. Her own pattern of lawsuits. We sat in the courtroom. The judge was a tall, older gentleman with a silver beard and glasses that sat low on his nose. He looked serious, but fair. Sandra walked in minutes later, wearing a soft cast on her ankle and holding herself like she was on the verge of tears. Her lawyer was some local guy known more for traffic tickets than personal injury. I'll give it to Sandra. She acted well. The dramatic sighs, the pained expressions, even a limp that switched legs twice during the morning. She'd brought printed photos of the driveway, arrows drawn in red ink, and even included screenshots of our Facebook barbecue party from months ago to try to paint us as negligent homeowners with a history of rule-breaking. But then our turn came. Sarah stood up, opened her laptop, and said, "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to present video evidence from the defendant's home security system. This footage is time-stamped and shows the incident in question from 2 separate angles." The judge nodded. She hit play. The courtroom went silent. There was Sandra on screen, clear as day, umbrella under her arm, walking confidently down our driveway. She passed the large "No Trespassing" sign without hesitation. She stepped onto the edge of the wet pavement, heels clicking with purpose. Then slip. Her leg shot forward, clipboard flew into the bushes, and she landed hard, right on her tailbone. She sat up slowly, looked around, and then the kicker. She glanced directly at the security camera and paused. 10 whole seconds passed. Then, like someone flipped a switch, she suddenly started clutching her ankle and screaming. The courtroom broke into muffled gasps and whispered laughter. Even the judge raised his eyebrows. Sandra's lawyer stood up, flustered. "Your Honor, the conditions were unsafe. She was delivering an official HOA warning. Sarah interrupted, her voice even and clear, which she had no legal right to do. The sign was visible. The property is private. She trespassed, ignored wet conditions, and staged a dramatic injury. We also have proof this is not her first attempt at this behavior. She opened another folder. Exhibit B, for previous lawsuits filed by Ms. Walker over the last 5 years. One involved a grocery store, where Sandra claimed she slipped on a grape and sprained her wrist. That case was dismissed after video showed her walking normally immediately afterward. Another was against a dog groomer. She claimed she tripped on a leash and sued for emotional trauma. Dismissed. A third, a department store escalator, claimed it jolted, and she fell. Security footage proved she walked out fine. And the fourth, a neighbor, ironically, from her old neighborhood, who she accused of having a dangerous crack in their sidewalk. That one didn't even make it past pretrial. Sarah continued, we also have documentation from a housing authority that confirms our client's ramp was legally protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and Ms. Walker was previously warned not to interfere. By now, Sandra's fake limp had all but vanished. She sat in her chair, pale and tight-lipped, her lawyer looking like he wanted to sink into the floor. The judge looked at Sandra directly. Ms. Walker, he said slowly, you are not the victim here. He paused to let the weight of that land. You trespassed on private property, ignored clear signage, slipped due to your own carelessness, and attempted to file a fraudulent claim against your neighbors. You have a history of similar claims, all dismissed. And now you come to my courtroom, asking for damages based on a situation that was entirely preventable and of your own making. He looked down at his notes, then back up. Case dismissed. You are ordered to cover court costs. Sandra's face turned deep red. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but the judge waved his hand dismissively. You may leave. She stood, wobbling only slightly now, funny how her limp was gone, and stormed out of the courtroom, muttering something under her breath about biased judges and neighbors from hell. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Sarah patted my dad on the shoulder. Justice served. Outside the courtroom, neighbors were waiting. Somehow word had spread. The Facebook group had been buzzing ever since the footage went public during the trial. People nodded at us. One elderly man from 3 houses down walked up and said, "Thank you for standing up to her. She made my wife cry once over holiday lights." We got home that evening and my dad, tired but smiling, wheeled himself up the ramp she hated so much. At the top, he turned to me and said, "You know, that ramp used to be about me walking again. But now, I think it stands for something bigger." And he was right. It stood for every neighbor she harassed, every mom she embarrassed over decorations, every kid she scared over chalk drawings, every veteran, elderly person, or disabled resident who needed a hand, not a citation. A week later, someone left an anonymous envelope in our mailbox. Inside was a printed screenshot of the courtroom video, and across the top in bold letters, it read, "We saw. We heard. Thank you." Sandra disappeared after that. Her house went dark. No gardening, no morning walks, no clipboard. A month later, a for sale sign appeared in the yard, and by the end of summer, she was gone. Our ramp still stands. Now it has flower planters on both sides and solar lights running along the edge. Sometimes kids from the neighborhood use it as a mini racetrack for scooters. My dad doesn't mind. In fact, he cheers them on. And every once in a while, a neighbor will stop by and say, "So glad you stayed strong." We nod, smile, and go back to grilling or gardening or just living. Because in the end, Sandra didn't just lose a lawsuit, she lost the neighborhood. And we gained it back. One ramp, one truth, one courtroom win at a time. After court, something strange started happening. We expected peace, maybe even silence, but instead, the exact opposite happened. Our doorbell rang 3 times that first weekend. 3 different neighbors. The first was an elderly woman from the end of the cul-de-sac. She introduced herself as June, held a small bag of homemade cookies, and with a shaky voice, said, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I didn't want to get involved. Thank you for standing up to her. She hugged my mom like they were old friends. They'd never spoken before that day. The second visitor was a young couple with 2 toddlers. They came by to say thank you as well, because a year ago, Sandra had fined them for leaving sidewalk chalk drawings on their own driveway. She said it was graffiti. The husband said, "We didn't have the energy to fight her. We scrubbed it off before the kids woke up the next morning." But now they felt seen. The third was the guy everyone called Mailbox Mike. He was a war vet too, quiet, always working on his truck. He walked up, looked my dad in the eye, and said, "You did what I couldn't. Much respect." Then he handed over a 6-pack of root beer and just nodded. Word spread quickly through the community. The video from court, Sandra falling, looking around before faking her injury, and then getting shut down by the judge, had made its way into the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone even added slow motion and put dramatic music behind it. The clip went mini-viral locally. Within a few days, everyone in the HOA had seen it. People began sharing their own Sandra horror stories. One man admitted Sandra fined him for having wind chimes that were too loud during a windy week. Another woman revealed Sandra had demanded she remove her kid's pink flamingo lawn ornament because it didn't fit the neighborhood's natural bird theme. A guy who had a small garden on the side of his garage said she once tried to report him for unauthorized farming. Sandra hadn't just annoyed people. She'd ruled over the community like a petty dictator with a clipboard. But after the lawsuit loss and the public embarrassment, her grip cracked. And once it cracked, it shattered. Neighbors began talking to each other more. People who had once just nodded in passing were now stopping in front yards, comparing stories. A community that had been controlled by fear started slowly rebuilding itself through laughter and unity. And then someone asked the question that changed everything. Why is she still on the board? It started with a petition, passed around online and door to door. Within 2 weeks, over 80% of the homeowners had signed. And once that number crossed the required threshold, it triggered an automatic special vote. The board couldn't ignore it. They scheduled the meeting for a Saturday afternoon at the community clubhouse. Normally, these meetings barely drew a dozen people. But that day, over 60 people showed up, packed in the folding chairs, shoulder to shoulder. My dad, sitting in his wheelchair near the front, said later it felt like a courtroom, but without the judge. The board president called things to order, but it was clear the people wanted a change. And the moment the vote began, the outcome was written on every face in the room. Sandra was removed, effective immediately. No applause, just quiet, relieved nods, as if the air itself had gotten a little lighter. She didn't even attend. She didn't dare. But the story didn't end there, because once Sandra was gone, someone nominated my dad to take her place. He laughed when he heard it. "Me," he said. "I can't even mow my own lawn these days." But people nodded. "You've got heart," one woman said, "and common sense." My dad hesitated, then shrugged. "Well, all right, but don't expect me to hand out fines for wind chimes." The vote was unanimous. And just like that, my dad, retired firefighter, stroke survivor, and now official wheelchair ramp warrior, was elected to the HOA board. It was poetic justice. His first meeting as board member was short and powerful. He stood, or rather sat, in front of everyone and said, "We're not here to make people miserable. We're here to make sure this community is livable. And that starts with compassion." Then he introduced his first motion, an amendment to the HOA bylaws. No prior approval shall be required for accessibility-related modifications, including, but not limited to wheelchair ramps, handrails, widened pathways, or door access improvements. Any attempt to block such modifications will be considered harassment. He finished with, "No one should have to beg to make their home livable." That ends today. The vote passed with 0 opposition. A few people clapped. Others smiled. Some had tears in their eyes. And just like that, the neighborhood changed. Not overnight, but bit by bit. Now, every morning, my dad sits out on the porch with a fresh mug of coffee. His ramp is still there. Only now it has flower boxes on the railings and solar lights that glow blue in the evening. Kids sometimes run up and down it laughing. Nobody complains. He's become a bit of a local legend. Neighbors drop by to chat. A teen from down the street mows our lawn every Saturday without being asked. A single mom whose son has cerebral palsy came by recently to ask if she could install a ramp too. Of course, my dad said. You don't need anyone's permission now, least of all Sandra's. And every time it rains, every time the clouds roll in and drizzle slicks the concrete, we put out a small sign on the edge of the driveway, black and white, laminated, simple, caution, slippery when karma strikes. It started as a joke, but now it's our symbol of justice, of resilience, of standing your ground without needing to yell. Sandra's house went up for sale a month later. No for sale by owner signs. Just a cold listing on Zillow. Price reduced. No goodbye posts in the neighborhood app. No farewell letters. She vanished like a ghost from a house no longer haunted. The new owners are a young couple with a golden retriever and a baby girl. The first thing they did? Hang wind chimes on their porch and paint a little pink flamingo on their mailbox. My dad gave them a thumbs up from his spot on the ramp. And I swear, I've never seen him look prouder. Not even when he retired. Not even when he got his Medal of Bravery from the fire department. Because this wasn't just about fighting a neighbor. It was about standing up when it mattered most and proving that dignity, decency, and determination can win, even in a world full of Karens with clipboards. So if you ever drive down our street and spot a man sipping coffee beside a ramp, under a porch with flowers and wind chimes, give him a nod. He earned it. And if it's raining, watch your step. Karma's got a slippery driveway.